I'm Sandra, 28 female. I live in a small but comfortable city, in a house I designed and built for myself. It's my sanctuary, the physical manifestation of a hard-won peace. This home was born from the ashes of a life I was forced to leave behind, a life I once thought was everything. My family, the very people who were supposed to be my foundation, tried to shatter my world, but instead, they gave me the motivation to build a new one entirely on my own terms. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My 25th birthday dawned with a sense of quiet dread. In most families, a quarter-century is a milestone worthy of celebration, a joyous occasion marked by cake, presents, and well wishes. In my family, it was a deadline. For years, my parents, Eleanor and Robert, had maintained a house rule as rigid as any building code. Their children were expected to be fully independent and out of the family home by the age of 25. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an edict. My older brother, Mark, had made the deadline with 6 months to spare, moving into a sleek downtown condo that my father had co-signed for and my mother had helped decorate. His departure was celebrated as a grand success, a testament to our family's values of ambition and self-sufficiency. But his path had been paved with my parents' help, a fact that was conveniently omitted from the triumphant family narrative. I, on the other hand, was on a different trajectory. As an architect fresh out of a grueling master's program, I was employed at a respectable firm, but my salary was modest. I was diligently saving every penny, chipping away at student loans, and building a nest egg for a down payment on a small condo. My dream wasn't just to move out, it was to one day design and build my own home. This was a long-term goal, a quiet ambition I nurtured in the margins of my life. I had a detailed 5-year plan, a realistic timeline that accounted for my income, my debts, and the city's inflated housing market. My parents were aware of my plan, or at least I thought they were. I had explained it to them over dinner on multiple occasions, showing them spreadsheets and timelines, believing their nods and murmurs signified understanding and approval. I was wrong. To them, my plan was just a series of excuses, a failure to meet the established family benchmark. The air in the house on my birthday was thick with unspoken tension. My mother, Eleanor, a former interior designer whose talents now focused exclusively on our immaculate home, had prepared my favorite breakfast, pancakes with lemon and sugar. But the gesture felt hollow, a performance of maternal affection rather than a genuine act of celebration. My father, Robert, a retired construction manager who viewed the world as a series of projects to be managed, sat at the head of the table, his newspaper held up like a shield. My younger sister, Jessica, a law student who had already mastered the art of prosecutorial glares, scrolled through her phone, pointedly ignoring me. Only Mark, my brother the financial advisor, offered a semblance of birthday cheer. "Happy birthday, Sandy," he said, sliding a small, elegantly wrapped gift across the table. 25, huh? The big one." He winked, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. It was the same condescending smile he'd worn since he started earning more than our father. The gift was a leather-bound planner, expensive and impersonal. Inside the front cover, he'd written, "Time to start planning the next phase." It wasn't a gift, it was a message. My stomach tightened. I offered a weak thank you and pushed the pancakes around my plate, my appetite gone. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rustle of my father's newspaper. Finally, he lowered it, his gaze landing on me with uncomfortable weight. "Sandra," he began, his tone clipped and formal, "your mother and I need to talk to you, after breakfast." That was it. No happy birthday. No pretense of celebration. This was an agenda item, a business meeting disguised as a family meal. Later in the living room, they sat opposite me on the pristine white sofa my mother had recently reupholstered. The room felt like a courtroom. My father was the judge, my mother the silent, observing jury. "As you know," my father started, steepling his fingers, "the family rule is clear. Mark followed it. Now it's your turn." I opened my mouth to bring up my 5-year plan again, to plead for a little more time and understanding, but my mother cut me off. "Sandra, dear," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "we've given you a wonderful education. We've provided a roof over your head. But there comes a time when the bird must leave the nest. It's for your own good. You're stagnating here." Stagnating? I was working sixth. Why-hour weeks, building a career, saving responsibly. How was that stagnation? "It's not that I don't want to leave," I explained, my voice trembling slightly. "It's just that I need more time to save. The market is impossible right now, and I don't want to be drowning in rent. I want to buy, to invest in my future." My father scoffed. "Excuses. When I was your age, I had a wife, a child on the way, and a mortgage. I didn't wait for the market to be perfect. I made it work." It was his favorite refrain, a comparison that ignored decades of economic change, inflation, and the crushing weight of student debt he never had to contend with. Mark, who had silently joined the gathering and was now leaning against the doorframe, chimed in. "Dad's right, Sandra. Sometimes you just have to take the leap. I can help you with a budget, maybe find you a rental you can afford." His offer of help felt like an insult, a suggestion that my own careful financial planning was inadequate. The conversation spiraled from there. My reasons were dismissed as childish fears, my architectural ambitions as fanciful dreams. They painted me as a freeloader, a dependent who was clinging to the comfort of her childhood home out of weakness. My sister Jessica even added her 2 cents, looking up from her phone to say, "Legally, once you're an adult, they have no obligation to house you. You should be grateful for the time you've had." Each word was a calculated blow, designed to strip away my confidence and paint me as an ungrateful failure. The worst part was the unity of their front. They were a solid wall of disapproval, their individual voices merging into a single, overwhelming chorus of condemnation. The final verdict was delivered by my father. "We're not discussing this further," he said, his voice leaving no room for appeal. "We've been more than patient. We expect you to have your things packed and be out of the house by the end of the month. That gives you 4 weeks. 4 weeks. My mind reeled. 4 weeks to find a place to live, to pack up 25 years of my life, to completely reconfigure my financial plan. It was impossible. But where will I go? I stammered, the full weight of their decision crashing down on me. "That," my mother said, standing up and smoothing down her dress, a clear signal that the meeting was over, "is what independent adults figure out for themselves. Happy birthday, dear." They walked out of the room, leaving me alone on the sofa, the echo of my mother's cruel "happy birthday" hanging in the air. I looked at the expensive planner Mark had given me. Time to start planning the next phase. It was a cruel, prophetic joke. The next phase of my life wasn't going to be a carefully executed plan. It was going to be an eviction. On my birthday, my family hadn't just given me a deadline. They had detonated a bomb under the foundations of my entire life. The shock was profound, a cold, creeping numbness that spread through my limbs. I had spent years believing I was part of a team, a family that, despite its quirks and pressures, would ultimately have my back. In the space of a single conversation, I learned the devastating truth. I was on my own. And as the initial shock began to subside, it was replaced by a slow-burning ember of anger. They wanted me to be independent? Fine. I would show them an independence they couldn't possibly imagine. The 4 weeks they gave me were a blur of frantic activity and quiet despair. I spent my lunch breaks scrolling through rental listings, my evenings packing boxes, and my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling of a room that was no longer mine. The atmosphere in the house was unbearable. My family treated me like a ghost, moving around me, speaking through me, their conversations ceasing the moment I entered a room. The home I had grown up in, a place once filled with the warmth of memories, now felt like a cold, unwelcoming hotel where my stay had expired. My attempts to reason with them were met with a stony silence. My father would simply walk away, my mother would offer a tight, pitying smile, and Jessica would quote tenancy laws as if she were prosecuting a squatter. Mark called once, not to offer support, but to advise me on the strategic benefits of renting to build a credit history. A lecture I neither needed nor wanted. I managed to find a small, dingy basement apartment across town. It was all I could afford on such short notice, a far cry from the life I had been meticulously planning. The landlord wanted the first and last month's rent plus a security deposit up front, a sum that eviscerated the down payment I had so painstakingly saved. Watching my savings account balance plummet was like a physical blow, a symbol of how my 5-year plan had been torched in a matter of weeks. The day I moved was gray and drizzling, a perfect pathetic fallacy for my mood. A friend from work, a kind soul named Liam, offered his truck and his time. As we ed my life into boxes, my family was conspicuously absent. My mother had a charity luncheon, my father was at the golf course, and Jessica was studying at the library. Mark didn't even bother to invent an excuse. Their absence was a final, damning statement. They hadn't just kicked me out, they had washed their hands of me completely. The final box was in the truck. I walked back into the house for one last look. It was strangely quiet. I stood in the hallway, my hand on the doorknob, when I heard my mother's voice from the kitchen. She was on the phone, her tone light and cheerful. "Oh, it was for the best, Susan," she chirped. "Tough love." She was getting far too comfortable. "This will be the making of her. Robert and I know what's best." Then I heard her laugh, a sound that cut me deeper than any of their lectures. They saw this as a parenting victory, a successful maneuver in their grand project of raising independent children. They had no concept of the pain, fear, and humiliation they had inflicted. They hadn't done it for me, they had done it for themselves, to uphold their precious family rules and maintain their image. With that laugh echoing in my ears, I walked out the front door and didn't look back. The first few months in the basement apartment were the hardest. It was perpetually damp. The single window offered a stunning view of a concrete retaining wall, and my upstairs neighbors had a fondness for loud arguments at 3 a.m. Every rent payment was a painful reminder of the thousands of dollars I had been forced to throw away. Money that should have been growing in my investment account, inching me closer to my dream. The anger I felt on my birthday had cooled into a hard, dense core of resolve. The grief for the family I thought I had was replaced by a grim determination. They wanted me to be independent. They wanted me to stand on my own 2 feet. I would do more than stand. I would build. I threw myself into my work with a ferocity that surprised even myself. I took on extra projects, stayed late, and volunteered for the most challenging assignments. My focus was absolute. While my colleagues were out socializing, I was at my desk, sketching, drafting, learning. My ambition was no longer a quiet, long-term goal. It was a roaring fire, fueled by every memory of my family's condescending smiles and hollow advice. The basement apartment became my cocoon. I filled its damp walls with sketches and blueprints, my own designs for small, efficient, beautiful homes. I spent hours studying zoning laws, material costs, and construction techniques. I wasn't just dreaming anymore, I was preparing. One evening, about 6 months after I'd moved out, a letter arrived. It was a generic holiday card from my parents. Inside, my mother had written a short, breezy note. "Thinking of you, we hope you're doing well and learning the value of $1. Love, Mom and Dad." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the turmoil they had caused, just a patronizing platitude that confirmed their complete lack of remorse. Tucked inside the card was a photograph of them, Mark and Jessica, smiling brightly in front of a Christmas tree. I wasn't in the picture. I had been neatly, efficiently, surgically removed from the family portrait. I stared at the photo for a long time, at their happy, perfect faces. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel longing. I felt nothing but a cold, clear sense of purpose. They had locked the door on me, believing they were teaching me a lesson. They had no idea that what they had really done was lock themselves out of my future. I taped the photograph to the wall above my drafting table. It became my ultimate motivation. Every time I felt tired or discouraged, I would look at it and remember why I was working so hard. I wasn't just building a house. I was building a fortress, a life where they could never hurt me again. The 2 years that followed were a testament to the power of pure, unadulterated focus. My life became a simple, repeating pattern: work, eat, draft, sleep. The basement apartment, which had once felt like a prison, transformed into my command center. The damp walls were now covered in corkboards pinned with material samples, cost analyses, and architectural renderings. I sold my car to eliminate the payment and insurance costs, opting for the city bus. I learned to cook cheap, nutritious meals, and my only form of entertainment was the public library and the vast online world of architectural journals. Every dollar I saved was a brick in the foundation of my new life. At work, my relentless dedication did not go unnoticed. I was promoted from junior architect to project lead. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, and for the first time, my savings began to accumulate at a pace that felt real. My 5-year plan was back on track, but it was no longer about a small condo. My vision had expanded. I wanted land. I wanted to create something from naught. I started my search in the overlooked corners of the city, in the neighborhoods that developers deemed transitional or up-and-coming. I spent my weekends walking the streets, studying the lots, looking for potential that no one else could see. After months of searching, I found it. A small, oddly shaped, overgrown lot at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It was wedged between an old warehouse and a small community garden. It had been on the market for years, considered undesirable because of its irregular dimensions and a slight downward slope. But I saw what others didn't. I saw how the morning sun hit the back of the lot. I saw the potential for a clever, split-level design that would work with the slope, not against it. I saw a home. Buying the land was the first real taste of victory. I paid for it in cash with the money I had saved, a moment of profound satisfaction. I held the deed in my hands, my name printed in crisp, black ink. Sandra L. Walker. No co-signers, no family assistants, just me. The day the sale closed, I went to the lot with a folding chair and a thermos of coffee. I sat there for hours, watching the light change, imagining the walls, the windows, the roofline. This wasn't just dirt and weeds, it was the beginning of everything. Designing the house was a labor of love. It was a manifestation of every idea I'd ever had about space, light, and living. I designed a modest, 2-bedroom home, compact but incredibly efficient. Every square inch had a purpose. I used sustainable materials and incorporated passive solar design to minimize energy costs. The irregular shape of the lot, the very thing that had deterred others, became my greatest asset, allowing for interesting angles and a private courtyard shielded from the street. The plans weren't just lines on paper. They were my declaration of independence, my answer to my mother's immaculate but soulless interiors and my father's rigid, conventional construction ideas. This house was going to be warm, intelligent, and uniquely mine. Getting the building permits was a bureaucratic nightmare, but my professional experience helped me navigate the city's complex regulations. I acted as my own general contractor to save money, a daunting task for even a seasoned professional. It meant my days were spent at the firm, and my evenings and weekends were spent on site, coordinating plumbers, electricians, and framers. I learned to negotiate with suppliers, to read soil reports, and to operate a skid steer. I was covered in dirt and drywall dust more often than not, my nails were permanently chipped, and I was perpetually exhausted. But it was a good kind of tired. It was the exhaustion of creation, of building something real with my own 2 hands and my own mind. My friend Liam was a constant source of support during this time. He'd show up on weekends with coffee and donuts, offering to haul lumber or paint walls, never asking for anything in return. "You're a force of nature, Sandra," he said one afternoon, as we sat on the subfloor of what would become my living room. "I've never seen anyone work so hard for something." His simple, genuine praise was worth more to me than any validation my family had ever offered. During the entire process, from buying the land to raising the walls, I had zero contact with my family. I had changed my phone number shortly after moving into the basement apartment and deleted my social media profiles. I was a ghost to them, and I preferred it that way. I assumed they were content with the new family portrait, the one without me in it. I couldn't have been more wrong. The peace was not destined to last. The house was nearly complete. The windows were in, the siding was up, and the interior was taking shape. I was standing in the kitchen, admiring the way the late afternoon sun streamed through the large window overlooking the courtyard, when a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. A woman got out. It took me a moment to place her. It was Susan, my mother's friend, the one she had been on the phone with the day I left. She peered at the house, her expression a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Our eyes met through the window. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, followed by shock. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I knew in that moment that my quiet, anonymous life was over. The message had been sent. My family now knew where to find me. And I had a sinking feeling they weren't coming to congratulate me. I had built my fortress, but I had forgotten that the most determined enemies are often the ones who believe they have a right to be inside the walls. A week passed in unnerving silence. I expected a call, a letter, an unannounced visit, but there was nothing. The quiet was more unsettling than an open confrontation. It was the calm before a storm I knew was coming. I pushed forward with the house, trying to focus on the final details: the flooring, the lig, T-fixtures, the paint. Each completed task was a small victory, a reaffirmation of my accomplishment. The house was transforming from a construction site into a home, my home, but a shadow of anxiety lingered, tainting the joy. The storm broke on a Saturday morning. I was on a ladder, painting the ceiling of the living room, when I saw my father's truck pull up. My heart hammered against my ribs. He didn't get out right away. He just sat there, staring at the house. Then another car pulled in behind him, my brother Mark's sleek sedan. Finally, my mother's SUV completed the procession. They emerged from their vehicles like a delegation, my father in the lead, my mother at his side, and Mark trailing them, phone pressed to his ear. Jessica was not with them, which I found odd, but a small relief. They walked up the newly laid stone path, their expressions a bizarre mix of awe and disapproval. I climbed down the ladder, my hands slick with sweat, my painting clothes splattered with white. I met them at the front door, which I had deliberately left open to let the paint fumes out. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice was steady, colder than I expected. My father, Robert, ignored my question. He was looking past me, his eyes scanning the high ceilings and the open concept layout. "Not a bad design," he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "The framing looks solid. Who was your contractor?" "I replied flatly. He raised an eyebrow. "Don't be ridiculous. You don't know the first thing about managing a build site." My mother, Alina, pushed past him, her eyes wide as she took in the space. "Sandra, this is substantial," she said, her tone dripping with false warmth. "But the flow is all wrong here, and these windows are far too large. You'll have no privacy." She ran a finger along a dusty windowsill, a critical frown on her face. "You should have consulted me. I could have helped you avoid these little mistakes." Mark finally ended his phone call, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Pretty ambitious project, Sandra," he said, looking around with a calculating expression. "Must have cost a fortune. You should have talked to me before taking on so much debt. I could have structured the financing for you, saved you a few points on the interest." The audacity of it was breathtaking. They stood in the middle of my nearly finished home, a home I had conceived, designed, and funded entirely on my own, a home that existed only because they had thrown me out, and their immediate reaction was to critique it, to belittle my efforts, and to insert themselves into my success. The anger I had kept banked for 2 years flared to life. "I didn't ask for your consultation," I said, my voice dangerously low. "I didn't need your financial structuring, and I certainly didn't need your construction management. I did this. Me, alone. Now I'll ask again, what do you want?" My mother flinched at my tone, clutching my father's arm. "Well, there's no need to be hostile," she said, her voice acquiring a wounded tone. "We're your family. We were worried. Susan told us she saw you here, and we came to make sure you were all right." "I've been all right for 2 years," I shot back. "You weren't worried then." My father stepped forward, his expression hardening. The false pleasantries were over. "Let's cut the nonsense, Sandra," he said. "This house, it's a family asset." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "A what?" "A family asset," he repeated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You wouldn't have the skills to design this without the architectural mind you inherited from my side of the family. You wouldn't have the courage to build it without the work ethic I instilled in you. You wouldn't have the money for it if we hadn't given you a rent-free place to live for years, allowing you to save." Mark nodded in agreement. "He's right, and the financial discipline to save that money, I taught you that. We all invested in you, your education, your upbringing, the roof over your head. This house is the return on that investment." My mother added the final delusional touch. "We're a family, Sandra. We share in each other's successes. We assumed, naturally, that you were building this for all of us. There's plenty of room. It would be a wonderful family home." I felt a wave of dizzying disbelief. They had stitched together a fantasy, a collective delusion in which my struggle and my triumph were not my own, but a communal project to which they were entitled. They hadn't come to see if I was okay. They had come to claim their share of the spoils. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You are not sharing in this. You have no claim to this. This is my house. You forfeited any right to be a part of my life, or my success, the day you kicked me out on my birthday." Their faces changed. The surprise and false concern were replaced by righteous indignation. "After all we've done for you," my mother gasped, "this is tea." "He thinks we get ungrateful." "You're being emotional and irrational," my father said, his voice rising. "This is a matter of principle. We contributed to your success, and we deserve to be recognized for it. We have a stake in this property." "You have nothing," I said, my voice rising to match his. "You have no stake, you have no claim. This conversation is over. Get off my property now, or I will call the police." Mark smirked, a nasty, confident little expression. "I don't think you want to do that, little sister," he said smoothly. "This is a family matter, and we're not done discussing it. You see, we've spoken to Jessica, and she agrees with us. She thinks we have a very strong case." My blood ran cold. Jessica, the law student. The threat wasn't just a delusional rant anymore. It was becoming real. They weren't just demanding a piece of my home. They were preparing to try and take it. Their retreat was not a surrender. It was a tactical withdrawal. They left in a cloud of muttered threats and resentful glares, leaving me shaking in the doorway of my unfinished home. Mark's final words, "She thinks we have a very strong case," echoed in my mind. For a moment, I allowed a sliver of doubt to creep in. Could they actually do this? Could they twist the law into a weapon against me? Jessica was smart, ambitious, and possessed a ruthless streak that I knew my parents would encourage and exploit. The thought of my own sister, my own family, trying to legally seize the very symbol of my independence was sickening. I spent the next few days in a state of high alert, my phone clutched in my hand, jumping at every car that drove down the street. The joy of building my home was gone, replaced by a grim sense of defensiveness. I installed security cameras around the property and made sure to lock the doors and windows the moment I arrived and before I left. My sanctuary had started to feel like a fortress under siege. The official declaration of war arrived a week later. It came via certified mail, a thick, formal-looking envelope that felt heavy with malice. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, printed on what looked like legal letterhead, though I suspected Jessica had just designed it on her computer to look intimidating. The letter was a masterpiece of distorted logic and legal-sounding jargon. It was titled, "Notice of Familial Investment and Demand for Equitable Distribution." It was signed not by a lawyer, but by my father, Robert Walker, on behalf of the Walker family estate. The letter laid out their preposterous claims in formal, numbered paragraphs. It cited my father's invaluable construction management expertise, offered verbally over a period of 2 decades, my mother's formative influence on the aesthetic and design principles of my work, and Mark's foundational financial guidance. It even quantified their investment, claiming that the rent-free living they had provided was equivalent to a cash investment of over $100,000, which had matured in the form of my property. The letter concluded with a chilling demand. I was to either add all 4 of their names to the deed of the house, thereby making it a shared family property, or I was to buy out their equitable stake for the sum of $250,000. If I failed to respond and comply within 30 days, they would be forced to pursue all available legal remedies to protect their investment. It was, in essence, a professionally formatted shakedown. It was extortion wrapped in the language of the law. Reading it, I felt a strange sense of calm descend upon me. The anxiety and fear were burned away by a cold, white-hot fury. The ambiguity was gone. They had drawn their battle lines, and their position was so absurd, so fundamentally unjust, that it was almost laughable. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed their united front and Jessica's pseudo-legal threats would intimidate me into submission. They mistook my desire for peace as a sign of weakness. I put the letter down on my new kitchen counter, took a deep breath, and made a call. I didn't call a friend for sympathy. I called the most respected property lawyer in the city. Her name was Evelyn Reed, a woman known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense approach. I had followed her work for years, admiring her from afar. Now, I needed her. I got an appointment for the following afternoon. I walked into her office, a space of calm professionalism with mahogany bookshelves and leather chairs, and laid the letter on her desk. She read it slowly, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked up at me over the top of her glasses. "Is any of this true?" she asked, her voice even. "Did they give you money for the land? Did they co-sign any loans? Is there a written agreement of any kind?" "No," I said firmly. "Nothing. I have bank statements, receipts, and contracts for every single thing, from the land purchase to the last box of nails. All of it in my name, paid for from my account." Evelyn Reed leaned back in her chair, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Well then," she said, tapping the letter with her pen, "this isn't a legal document, it's a fantasy novel. It's an attempt at intimidation, and a clumsy one at that." The relief that washed over me was immense. "So they have no case?" I asked, my voice filled with hope. "In my professional opinion," she said, "they don't have a leg to stand on. Familial investment based on dinner conversations and inherited talent is not a concept that exists in property law. It's nonsense. However," she continued, her expression turning serious, "that doesn't mean they can't cause you trouble. They can still file a frivolous lawsuit. It would be expensive for them, and they would almost certainly lose and likely have to pay your legal fees, but it would drag you through a stressful, time-consuming, and public process. They're counting on you wanting to avoid that." She was right. That was their leverage, my desire to avoid a messy, public family feud, but they had underestimated how much I had changed. I was no longer the timid girl who just wanted to keep the peace. "So what do we do?" I asked, my own resolve hardening. "We don't just defend," Evelyn said, her eyes gleaming. "We attack. We are going to respond to this work of fiction with a very real, very serious legal document. We are going to send them a cease and desist letter. It will inform them that their claims are baseless and defamatory. It will demand they cease all contact with you and cease making these false claims to any third parties. And it will put them on notice that if they proceed with any legal action, you will not only vigorously defend yourself, but you will also countersue for legal fees, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." The strategy was perfect. It was proactive, powerful, and it turned the tables on them completely. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. I was no longer just a target, I was fighting back. Evelyn drafted the letter that afternoon. It was a thing of beauty, concise, professional, and utterly terrifying. It dismantled their claims point by point, citing relevant case law and statutes. It was a surgical strike of legal reality against their bloated delusions. As I signed the retainer agreement, I felt like I was signing my second declaration of independence. The first had been with dirt and wood and concrete. This one was with ink and paper, but it was just as powerful. The letter was sent via courier the next morning, addressed to my father, with copies sent to my mother, Mark, and, most importantly, to Jessica. The ball was now in their court. I had called their bluff. Now, we would see just how strong they thought their case really was. The cease and desist letter had the immediate effect of shattering their united front. The silence that followed was different this time. It was the heavy, anxious silence of people who have been caught in a lie and are scrambling to figure out their next move. My security cameras captured Mark's car visiting my parents' house multiple times in the days that followed. I could only imagine the frantic, panicked conversations taking place within those walls. They had started a fire, assuming I would be the only one to get burned. Now, the flames were licking at their own feet. About 2 weeks later, I received a call from Evelyn Reed. "Good morning, Sandra," she said, her voice crisp. "I've just received a call from a Mr. Peterson, an attorney representing your family. It seems they've decided to lawyer up." A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. "So they're suing?" "Not yet," Evelyn replied calmly. "Mr. Peterson has requested a four-way mediation meeting. You, me, your father, and him. He's framing it as a good-faith effort to resolve this family matter without resorting to litigation. In reality, they know their case is weak, and they're hoping they can intimidate you into a settlement in a less formal setting. They want something, anything, they can walk away with to save face." Evelyn's advice was to agree to the mediation. "Let them lay their cards on the table in a professional setting," she said. "It's better to dismantle their arguments in a conference room now than in a courtroom later. We go in, we listen, we say no, and we leave. It will establish a record of our reasonableness and their baseless demands." The mediation was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon at a neutral law office downtown. Walking into that conference room felt surreal. My father, Robert, was already there, seated next to a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit who I presumed was his lawyer, Mr. Peterson. My father looked older than I had ever seen him, his usual air of command replaced by a sullen, defensive posture. He refused to make eye contact with me. Evelyn and I sat opposite them, the room was sterile and impersonal, a beige box designed for conflict resolution. Mr. Peterson began with a long, rambling preamble about the importance of family and the unfortunate nature of such disputes. He then proceeded to rehash the same absurd claims from their letter, though his language was more cautious and couched in qualifiers. He spoke of my father's guidance, my mother's influence, and the family's emotional and financial support. He proposed a fair and equitable settlement, a cash payment of $50,000 to acknowledge the family's foundational contributions to my success. It was a drastic reduction from their initial demand of $250,000, a clear sign of their desperation. When he finished, Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She let the silence hang in the air for a moment before she spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room with authority. "Mr. Peterson," she began, "I have listened patiently to your client's position. Now let me be unequivocally clear." She then proceeded to systematically, calmly, and devastatingly demolish their entire argument. She had brought a binder with her. She opened it and slid a document across the table. "This is a copy of my client's bank statement, showing the wire transfer for the full cash purchase of the lot, drawn from an account solely in her name. An account, I might add, that has never received a single deposit from any member of your client's family." She slid another document over. "These are the architectural plans, filed with the city, bearing my client's professional stamp, her intellectual property." Another. "This is a sworn affidavit from my client's former landlord, confirming the rent she paid for 2 years, demonstrating that she was not, in fact, living rent-free in the years leading up to this project." She continued, document by document, building an unshakable wall of evidence. Receipts, contracts, emails, each one a brick in that wall. With every new piece of evidence, my father shrank further into his chair. Mr. Peterson's face grew paler. "As for your client's claims of guidance and influence," Evelyn continued, her tone sharp as glass, "I'm sure you're aware that in the absence of a written contract or partnership agreement, such contributions are legally considered gifts, freely given with no expectation of financial return. If Mr. Walker wishes to argue that every piece of fatherly advice he has ever given constitutes a billable hour, I suspect it would open up a rather interesting line of questioning about his own financial obligations to his daughter throughout her life." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "My client," she said, looking directly at my father for the first time, "built her home after being summarily evicted from yours. She did it with her own money, her own talent, and her own 2 hands. The suggestion that she owes you anything for this accomplishment is not just legally baseless, it is morally reprehensible. She closed the binder with a sharp snap. So, to be clear, we reject your offer. There will be no $50,000 payment. There will be no payment of any kind. My client owes you nothing. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. The harassment of my client ends today. If you choose to file a suit after this, we will not only seek immediate dismissal, but we will file for full recovery of all legal fees and pursue sanctions against you and your client for frivolous litigation. Are we understood? The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared at the binder on the table as if it were a venomous snake. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, shuffled his papers, and looked at his client. "Robert," he whispered. My father didn't answer. He just gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He was beaten. He knew it. His lawyer knew it. I had to fight the urge to smile. It wasn't a feeling of joy, but one of profound, final vindication. Evelyn stood up. "I believe we're done here," she said. We walked out of the conference room, leaving my father and his lawyer sitting in stunned silence. As we rode the elevator down, Evelyn turned to me. "That's the end of that," she said. "They won't be back." In that moment, I knew she was right. I hadn't just won a legal argument. I had reclaimed my own story. They had tried to rewrite my success as their own, but the truth, backed by indisputable facts, had been my ultimate weapon. The courtroom had been a sterile conference room, and the battle had been fought with paper. But the victory was as real and as solid as the foundation of the house I had built. The weeks following the mediation were the quietest I had ever known. It was a new kind of silence, not the tense, anxious quiet of waiting for the other shoe to drop, but a deep, peaceful stillness. The war was over. I had won. There were no more threatening letters, no more unexpected visits, no more calls from lawyers. There was just peace. I threw myself into the final stages of finishing my home with a renewed sense of joy and purpose. The cloud of litigation had lifted, and I could finally see my creation for what it was. Not a fortress to defend, but a sanctuary to be lived in. Liam came over the first weekend after the mediation to help me lay the hardwood floors. As we worked, I told him everything that had happened. He listened intently, shaking his head in disbelief at my family's audacity. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Sandra," he said, "but honestly, I'm not surprised you won. They picked a fight with the most determined person I know." His words meant more to me than he could ever know. My family had tried to define me by their standards, to mold me into their version of success. But Liam, a friend who had seen me at my most vulnerable and my most resilient, saw me for who I truly was. My moving-in day was not a grand affair. It was just me, a few boxes of clothes and books, and my drafting table. I spent the first night on a mattress on the floor of the living room, too tired and too happy to even set up my bed. I didn't have much furniture yet, but it didn't matter. The house itself was enough. I lay there in the dark, looking up at the high ceilings I had designed, the moonlight streaming through the large windows my mother had criticized. It was perfect. A few months later, as I was settling into my new life, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was a standard white envelope with my mother's familiar handwriting. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Inside was a single birthday card. It was for my 28th birthday. The front of the card was a generic floral design. Inside, my mother had written a few short, stilted sentences. "Sandra, we hope this card finds you well. We have decided it is best for all parties to cease contact permanently. We wish you a life of contentment." It wasn't an apology. It was a surrender, cloaked in the language of mutual agreement. The final phrase, "a life of contentment," was telling. It wasn't a wish for happiness or success or joy. Contentment was the best they could bring themselves to offer, a small, passionless word for a daughter who had dared to outgrow them. There was no mention of my father, Mark, or Jessica. This was clearly my mother's attempt at a final, face-saving word. I read the card once, then twice. I felt no anger, no sadness, just a sense of finality. They had kicked me out, tried to extort me, and then threatened to sue me. And now they were formally disowning me, pretending it was their decision. It was the most pathetic and yet most fitting end to our story. I didn't keep the card. I walked it to the kitchen and dropped it into the recycling bin. They had demanded a piece of my home, a share of my success. But in the end, all they got was silence. They had threatened me with legal action, but it was their own baseless claims that were dismissed. They had tried to define my life, but I was the one who got to write the ending. My life now is quiet, and it is my own. I have a successful career. I have a home that I love, a space that is a true reflection of who I am. I have good friends like Liam, people who value me for my character, not for what I can provide them. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in my courtyard in the early morning with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky, I think of them. I don't feel hatred. I feel a distant, clinical pity for people so trapped in their own narratives of entitlement that they would rather destroy their family than admit they were wrong. They thought kicking me out was an act of tough love that would forge me into someone they could be proud of. The irony is, they succeeded. They forced me to become stronger, more resilient, and more independent than they ever intended. They taught me that the only foundation you can truly rely on is the one you build for yourself. And as the sun climbs higher, filling my home with light, I know that I have built well. The silence they left behind is the most beautiful sound in the world. It is the sound of peace. It is the sound of freedom. It is the sound of a new day dawning just for me.